Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for new stories from Yellowcat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. What's the worst neighbor from H behavior you've witnessed? Part 3. Psycho moves in next door to my grandmother's house in 1975, tears down existing fence between property and rebuilds it 3 feet into her property. Grandma politely and meekly asks him to move it back. Neighbor tells 85-year-old grandma to F off, literally, and lays a string of other curse words on her, telling her the property is now his. Dad goes to grandmother's, asks neighbor to move fence. Neighbor tells Dad to F off. Dad was smart and a man you did not F with. Dad hires surveyor to confirm property lines. Confirmed. Dad hires contractor to tear down fence. Neighbor calls police. Police come. Dad, grinning evil grin at neighbor, shows police the survey. Police tell neighbor to F off, not literally, or go to jail. Dad sues neighbor for cost of survey, fence removal, and travel expenses. He lived 300 miles from grandmother's. Dad wins. Not a neighbor, but a tenant. In this instance, possibly even worse. My parents own a row house in New York City and rent out the bottom level. Our longtime tenant of at least 6 years, 2 of them at a previous address, finally moved away, leaving us with an empty apartment. My folks agreed to rent the place to our neighbor's daughter. First warning sign. At first, she seemed pleasant, but as soon as she moved in, she became increasingly erratic and intolerable. We apparently walked too loud for her. The house isn't all that new, the floorboards creak. I get it, I hate it too, but you were in the place before you signed the lease, weren't you? They literally couldn't walk any more nimbly, but that seemingly wasn't good enough. She began to complain about all sorts of mundane things constantly. It became increasingly apparent that she is some form of mentally ill. She claims to work from home, but she obviously sleeps during the daytime and seems to do nothing but watch TV otherwise. After a while, she stopped paying rent completely. She wouldn't answer the door or her phone at all. Whenever she was awake, she began turning up the volume of her TV all the way on one side of the house, and then the volume on her radio all the way on the other side. It made the ground floor of our home a complete H from sometime midday until 2 a.m. plus at night. It's just a cacophony of garbage inside our house 7 days a week. Sometimes, my folks would come home to find garbage randomly strewn about the balcony. We know it was her or her rotten passive-aggressive dad, who I guess constitutes the neighbor from H in this story. They had to install a security camera and a lockbox for mail. Pretty sure she stole some of that as well. It also seems that she turns all the taps on her apartment and just leaves them sometimes, which leaves us with no hot water whatsoever, and naturally, we pay for all of this. The SC glaze on top of this S-cake was when they finally went to court. It turns out that evicting someone in the city of New York is nearly impossible. After this woman acts completely insane, actively terrorizes my mother, and refuses to pay rent or even talk to us for months, the judge had the nerve to ask what we were offering her to move out. The judge apparently refused to kick a woman out onto the street, despite the fact that her father lives in a house just as big as ours, literally next door, and that she be allowed to live in our apartment rent-free until the end of June with the option, oh good lord, to actually pay rent and stay until September. So, by court order, my folks are legally being menaced in their own home by someone who has effectively stolen their property just as much as if she broke into our house and stole the furniture. Many thousands have gone down the tube due to non-payment of rent, not to mention that she shared utilities that she used and obviously doesn't pay for, and we have absolutely no clue what she's actually done to the apartment downstairs. She glued some kind of paper over the outside windows to completely obscure everything, and we suspect it will take a lot of money in renovations to ever make it livable for other tenants again. If we ever have tenants ever again. My mother feels so shell-shocked from this entire experience, she isn't sure if she would be willing to try to rent again. Homeowners seemingly have no power over their own property in this city/state. I understand our history of slums and slumlords, but the court system doesn't seem to care about nuance. There is no reasonable person who could walk into this situation and believe that we're at fault here, but bureaucracies aren't reasonable people. Denizens of New York City, take note. If you don't want to pay rent, just don't. Make sure you actually have a lawyer when you get taken to court, though. Either way, you'll probably get at least a few rent-free months out of it. If she isn't out at the end of June and doesn't take her free option to actually pay, U.S. Marshals will supposedly finally evict her. It only took 9 months. We had some neighbors that were real Haitians. You could practically smell the sulfur and coal coming from their house, though, in retrospect, that may have just been a meth lab, which would explain a lot. Our dogs always seemed to keep getting out of our backyard. We'd find the gate undone, which was on a spring and auto-latched when it was allowed to swing shut. We thought it was odd, but since we always left the backyard through the back door of the house, we put a padlock on the gate. Dog escape stopped for about 2 months. All of a sudden, dogs started mysteriously getting loose again. Neighbors show up and threaten to call animal control to have our Belgian Shepherd, a retired canine unit dog, put down if she kept getting out. We put her downstairs while we walked the perimeter, discovered a hole under the fence leading to neighbor's yard with a large pile of dirt on the neighbor's side of the fence where dirt was removed. Took pics for documentation and took the pics to neighbor. "Well, Ash, there's your problem. Dogs keep digging under the fence to get into my yard," was the response we got. My response in turn, "So, let me get this straight. Our dog dug a hole under the fence to your side of the yard," which got, "Yep, that's right." To which I rebutted, "And all of this dirt that my dog allegedly removed from the hole in the process of digging somehow ended up on your property, like the dog put it all in a bag just to dump it there?" The neighbor fell silent and got really nervous. "Yeah, I thought so. Leave my fence, my property, and my dog alone, you lying sack of S." I should also mention, the guy's son has this habit of taking his fancy A car and plowing through our metal garbage cans when they were up on the street, strewing our garbage everywhere, which carried a hefty fine for us twice by the city, and denting the cans to H and back, requiring hours of work reshaping them. There is a bittersweet note of vengeance being had, however. That weekend, I took our metal trash cans, went down to Lowe's, and filled them to the brim with concrete mix with sand mixed in, and let it cure over the weekend. Sunday night, I rolled them up to the street, per usual, and just let them sit. Monday morning, we awoke to an ear-rending crunch crash. The neighbor's son was out there cursing up a storm at the cans, now sans lids, displayed their gray and cement glory to the world as his burst radiator spewed hot steam everywhere, and we later learned the moisture spraying across the engine block cracked it wide open, totaling out the car. Never have I been so happy to see a wreck in all my life. We had 2.5 acres of property growing up in the desert in Arizona. It was on a dirt road with other houses in 2.5 to 5 acre lots nearby. I grew up riding off-road vehicles on the trail I had carved throughout our property. I had one neighbor that would regularly call the cops claiming the dust I kicked up from hundreds of feet away was bothering him on his property. I grew up in a large house in a good neighborhood that my dad built, but when times got tough, we rented out rooms to cover expenses. I consider myself very lucky to have grown up with a wide variety of people, but my crotchety old neighbor didn't like it. He would routinely shout borderline racist comments at our minority tenants like, "You people are bringing down this street's property value," or "This used to be a nice Christian neighborhood." He never picked on our white housemates, just the black, Latin, or Middle Eastern. On several occasions, I'd hear a car pull into my driveway, followed by his obnoxious shouting. So many times my housemates would come in with long, solemn faces, and I'd know exactly what had just happened. This man produced so much senseless hurt in our lives. I think the worst part was that he was smart enough not to do anything to get himself arrested, but would certainly push the boundaries and actively try to get my housemates in trouble. He wasn't some mangy redneck type. He was a clean-cut, suburban grandpa-looking D-head and could be quite articulate with the authorities. He'd report someone was breaking into our house if a housemate was the only one home, so he or she would have to explain to the cops that they weren't robbing the place, they just live here. He'd constantly make bogus noise complaints, even though we never threw parties. He would never leave his driveway, but would always taunt people to come over here and say it to my face to coax them onto his property. We never did, as we always suspected that this was so he'd have an alibi if he were to pull a gun on someone. I left home after high school, but I heard that his racism grew further and further out of control, and there were several incidents involving the cops being called on him. He eventually left the neighborhood when 2 black families bought the houses on either side of his. My neighbors started cutting down the bushes/trees on my property without my permission because they said it was growing too much. They parked their camper on my side of the property and refused to move it. I have huge blackberry bushes in the back of my yard, and every year I catch them picking the fruit for themselves. The first house we bought was purchased speedily and without doing much research into the neighborhood/neighbors. We'll never make that mistake again, and we ended up living next to the noisiest, most intrusive man I've ever encountered. He was around 55, disabled, and spent every single second of his life at home outside, usually shirtless and in tiny shorts, being noisy and basically acting like we lived in the same household, minding all of our business. Every time I went outside, every single time, he came outside and stood on his porch and talked to us. I wish I was kidding, but no, every darn time. This is quite alarming, as it meant I always felt like someone was watching me and never felt at ease. This was not helped in any way by the fact that our houses were max 15 feet apart, and his deck overlooked my deck in the back, and we were on a hill, so basically we could never go anywhere outside and enjoy our yard without him coming outside and talking at us. We couldn't have friends over and do anything outside because he would come up to the fence and join in like he was invited. If we tried to do yard work outside, he came out and stood there talking. It drove me insane. They also had this extremely strange alcoholic working for them who they let live in their house for months at a time while they spent time in their other property they inherited when a relative passed away. I thought that this would mean things would improve. However, the guy they let stay in their house was just as bad as he was and also talked to me every time I went outside as well. Soon after, nosy neighbor and his wife moved back into the house and things got a tad bit better, only because we started going outside head down and only giving 1 or 2 word answers when he talked to us. We got the tax credit that Obama offered in 2009 for first-time home buyers, and as soon as the 3 years required time limit passed, you were required to stay there 3 years or lose the tax credit, we bought another house and moved out of this one as quick as we could. The moral story? Always do tons of covert ops before you buy a house and scope out all information on the neighbors that you possibly can. You aren't just buying your house, you're buying your neighborhood and everyone who lives in it. I parked a very small trailer on a public street. A day later, I get 2 emails and a nasty letter from the B up the street demanding me to move it. I told her that it was going to be there for another week, then it's gone. She proceeded to call the police on me for parking my trailer on her property, which is 300 yards away. When the police arrived, they proceeded to tell me how people like her can be dangerous. They want something to be their way so bad, they will call you on every stupid thing you do or that she thinks you could possibly do. They then tell me that I could keep it there for 60 days before it's towed. I kept it there for 58 days. B, I win. If you want to watch the part 2, click the link here. Thank you for watching. Guys, thank you for all the support and the likes. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. See you next time.